Today I revisit a critical issue on refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. This is a bonus episode with expert insights, following up on show number 2 on World Refugees Day, which I dubbed A New Approach for Refugees. Stay tuned. Sasa, hello, bonjour, salam. From where you are listening in, karibu sana to Safari Podcast, a deep dive into life's most crucial issues with an exploration of how to make things better. Yes, you heard me. Making things better, you and I. I am your host, Werimo Gitao, a journalist, researcher, communications expert with one of the most important jobs in the universe. You guessed that right. A mother to a teenager. I have been living in Nairobi, Kenya's capital since I was born, until I recently relocated to Kajiado County, situated in Kenya's Rift Valley. Kajiado County is one of the counties which in recent days has benefited from relief food as ongoing regional drought in the Greater Horn of Africa deteriorates. This is the worst drought in 40 years. Short rains expected this month are not showing any signs of pouring. And for the past 4 years, neighboring countries including Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya have had intermittent rains consequently affecting crop yields. So you may ask how this links to refugees. The general assumption is people flee due to conflicts. A fact, no denying it, but when hunger bites, throats dry due to lack of water, and livestock dying, then fleeing is a necessity. As part of the Global Compact on Refugees built on the Refugee Convention and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we, you and I, yes, not just governments, should uphold non-refoulement principle, which just basically means no returning of refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, people who are fleeing to dangerous countries by either our policies, actions, and words. Victor Nyamori is a researcher with Amnesty International. We had a conversation about the feasibility of Kenya's recent uploaded Refugee Act.
At least we, advantage-wise, we have a law that calls for solutions, durable solutions, including integration in the local community, and also calling for integration in terms of other livelihood engagements. But the idea, obviously we have it in law, practical of it working, it's still a long process. Because we all start from the time our refugees arrives in the country, stays in the country, conducts his status, goes to school, all these other areas, goes for medical support, goes for university, get married. All these other areas require a lot of support, and this support can only be made easy when the laws and policies are made easy for them to access these things. So when the law is there, it now calls on us and also other government institutions now to move a step further by making sure the process is easier and for all refugees to access these solutions within the country.
Thank you. And you currently published an article. Maybe you want to mention a little bit about it. What were you proposing, or what were you arguing? What kind of conclusions did you come up with?
Yes, the article, it's a part of a book chapter which has just been published by several other researchers from Global South. And we were trying to analyze the challenges of the process, how migrants and refugees have in terms of access to livelihood and access to work. For the Kenyan work, we did it with my colleague known as Charity. Our engagement was trying to analyze the previous Refugee Act, that was the 2006 Refugee Act, and access to work rights in Kenya. What we found out was that the law actually supported refugees to access work by indicating that refugees have access to Class M work permit. But the practicability of that working was quite a challenge. In one instance case, in one of the cases that we analyzed in that particular article, when somebody applied to access work permit, he got a one-line response from immigration that this work can be done by Kenyans. So that one shows you the mood and the thinking of the different government departments of the kind of when refugees apply for opportunities. With that kind of thinking, obviously it was quite difficult. Our recommendation was obviously, there's still more that needs to be done within the immigration and specifically the department that issues work permits. But also our idea was that in the near future, there is no point for refugees to apply for work permit. Once you get registered, you can be able to access other opportunities within the country. So that the document that you have is the same as an ID that can allow you to apply for KRA documents. It allows you to apply for work, like it is happening in other jurisdictions. Although they might be limited depending on what status one has, but at least it gives you some opportunity to receive some payment monthly and be paid for work done.
And people would then argue in terms of the vetting process, given that there has been alleged accusations on terror attacks, not only in Kenya but globally linked to terrorist cells, including Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. How then can that be balanced to an extent where refugees are not pinned or they are not blamed for such acts, but then also balancing it with the knowledge that there could be possibilities of those links?
I will tell you, if you look at all the terrorist-related cases in Kenya, the last one that was convicted, the one that was the Garissa attack and the Westgate attack, none of them possess documents of refugees. From an Amnesty International point of view, there is always no evidence that the government has to show that there is a linkage between refugee population and terror activity, because none has come to fore. No refugee has been convicted, jailed for terrorist-related activity. However, there are gaps within the system where migrants, I will call them migrants, people who cross the country, cross the border for other reasons that engage on these other illegal activities. For me, it's very improper that the government ensure that their structures for screening are very proper, ensure that people are properly registered, people are well documented. As we talk now, there are over 20,000 unregistered new arrivals in Dadaab refugee camps. That's a security gap for the government. So it still calls on the government. It has the machineries, it has the powers to be able to do all this it requires in terms of security management.
Thank you so much, Victor. Proper screening, registration, and documentation of those seeking refuge is paramount to aiding in their finding a legal home away from their home. Ajak Jok Ajak is a thriving former refugee from South Sudan and now admitted as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. The journey, he says, has not been easy. Here is his story. From Kakuma refugee camp to living his dream.
It's been a long journey. I came to Kenya back in 1999, late of 1999, and from there I was registered as a refugee and stayed in Kakuma refugee camp for the last 22 years, I would say. Although in the process, my primary school I studied in Kakuma, and thereafter I got a chance to study in high school in Nakuru, and then subsequently to Moi University School of Law, and I finished in 2018. And then in 2019 I joined Kenya School of Law and completed in 2020 during the pandemic. Yeah. So I'm happy. I left South Sudan because of the apparent civil war that was happening. And it was like tribes against tribes, and also the war, the civil war between the north and the southerners. So, but anyway, even after peace came, Kakuma was still a better place to be than to go back home. So that is the case for me, and I'm happy that far I've reached here in Kenya.
Yeah, and it's impressive that until where you are, the line of your study and your career in law, why that field of study, and how has the journey been like to what have the challenges been?
Okay, the challenge with having big ambitions, like if you want to do law or medicine and engineering and you're a refugee child, is mostly access to higher education become a challenge, because there are limited opportunities for refugees, especially to access higher education. The challenge that I met is the fact that even the scholarship that were available, they could not offer the law degree, and they wanted me to do a different course like criminology and other humanitarian kind of and things to do with leadership. So which courses were not to my interest. And I remember when I first got the Duffy scholarship, I was actually given a chance to do criminology in Masinde Mulero University of Science and Technology, which I declined. I refused to accept. But fortunately enough, we had a dialogue with the Wendell International, and they later accepted for me to do law in Moi University. So those are some of the challenges that you meet on the way. And other things are like, okay, after your law degree, what do? Maybe you want to practice law, but the legal practice space is not meant for foreigners. The way it is, the legal system has been set up, so you have been excluded from. Like for me, the struggle was hard for me to become an advocate of High Court of Kenya. We had to go to court with some of my colleagues for the court to actually declare that we can actually be admitted to practice law in Kenya. So it's not been easy. It's a tough one, but we thank God that we are finally to the close, and maybe next month I will be admitted, because I was gazetted this month on 7th of June. So those are some of the challenges. These are challenges that all professional courses students have to go through. Like I have fellow refugees who are doing medicine, and they are undergoing the same problem, the same even those who are doing engineering. So, but we hope that this, through advocacy, these changes are going to take place.
Yeah. And there's the new Refugee Act that the President of Kenya, Kenyatta, sent into law. What, number one, of course, how do you feel about it? And in terms of the legality of its practicability and implementation, what are your thoughts about it? And what more would need to be done to ensure there's a pragmatic application of it?
Yeah, the new Refugee Act is really very transformative in the manner of management of refugee affairs in Kenya. There are 5 things that I believe are the good, the additions to the new law in terms of refugee management. And although some need to be done, and number one is that the law now explicitly states that refugees should be enabled to practice and to engage in trade and business and gainful employment in Kenya, which was not the case before. Although refugees could work by being issued a Class M work permit, the law was not so expressed. There was no guarantee, and in most cases, it was so difficult for refugees to be employed anywhere in Kenya. And another thing that is it's a big add in the new refugee law is that there is an aspect of integration, although from the reading of the Act, you cannot see how refugees are being integrated, because it is not clear from the international perspective of integration, and what the access is different, because they are going to talk of sharing of institutions and public facilities like hospitals and schools, but it's not clear, for instance, whether a refugee child will have free access to primary education. It's not clear from the wording of the act. It is also not clear whether, when you talk of free secondary school, will refugee children have such rights, or will they be excluded? So sharing of facilities is a good thing, at least, so refugees don't have to be confined in the camp where they have different and separate hospitals. So they can, if you have an issue, you can maybe come to Nairobi to Moi Teaching. You can go to Eldoret to Moi Teaching Referral Hospital, or you can go to Kenyatta Hospital here, or any other facility. So those are some of the advantages. Another advantage is that Section 31 of the new Act actually acknowledges that refugees can change their places of residence. So refugees have been confined to the periphery of Kenya, along the borders, and these are barren places that life is so difficult, and maybe some things and access to services is so highly impeded. So, but under the new Act, for instance, if you are someone like Ajak, you have gone through school, and maybe you are a lawyer now, and you can't practice law in Kakuma. So the Act gives you that leeway maybe to apply to the Department of Refugee Services, so that you can be transferred to maybe Nairobi, Nakuru, or any other city, so that you are able to engage in any business, trade, or practice there, which is a good thing. Because I remember back then I tried to transfer my data from Kakuma to Nairobi, but it was a very big challenge. It was difficult, and I was told that it was suspended at some point, and there was no prospect of the government lifting that suspension of transfer of data. And another thing is the regional integration when you talk of East African community. Most of the refugees in Kenya actually come from the East African community. So now, if you talk of integration, the big question is, okay, if all these refugees are integrated to move freely and to settle anywhere within the community, which means you will have reduced the refugee population in Kenya by about half, because South Sudanese refugees are like almost 30% in Kenya. And now it means if they are integrated using the treaty, the East African treaty, then it means that 30% of refugees already will have been at least done away with in the country. And the same thing to Uganda, Rwanda, and other like Tanzania, although there are few of them. So what we don't know about integration is whether it will be done in the perspective of home country, or it will be done under the refugee management program, because these are two separate regimes. Like the refugee management is different from how countries manage. For instance, as a refugee, will you now be required to take the passport of your country? Will you use the consular services, or how will you be assisted when you are living in Kenya? Or will you use your refugee ID to travel across border? Like now, I am associated, but I cannot cross the border with my refugee ID. So the question is, can I now cross the border and go to Uganda and go to Rwanda with my refugee ID without the need for convention travel document or something? So those are some of the advantages. But the law is still raw because the regulations are underway. So maybe next month, they should be ready by next month. Maybe by next month, the regulations will be out. And what is in the regulation is really what is going to determine whether this law is going to serve refugees, or it is just a bulky document that is not adding anything. Because if you talk of access to gainful employment, previously refugees could actually access it, but they were limited by Class M work permit. For instance, if the regulations now include the class...
Maybe tell our listeners Class M permits, because you have listeners who are listening, and even the conception of being a refugee is still alien, because sometimes of the distance we have on social issues. So maybe give us a little bit of what that permit does.
This Class M work permit or business permit basically is a permit that is issued to someone who is a refugee for them to be able to engage in any gainful employment or to open a business or any trade, practically. And the reason for this is the government has designed it such that refugees are not supposed to access the labor market directly. So refugees are supposed to be limited, and only people with special skill or exceptional skills that any ordinary Kenyan do not have are the ones who are supposed to be employed. So if you look at the circumstances of refugees, you will wonder which exceptional skills can refugees have. Exactly, because as a refugee, you've gone through school in the camp, and so your education, even is in one way or another, has been affected by the fact that you are learning half day for most of your life because camps are so full. The secondary school and primary schools are full. There is the morning session and there is the afternoon session, which means people learn for a maximum of 4 hours in the camps. So that being the case, so it will be so hard for refugees to have exceptional skills that any other ordinary Kenyan do not have. And maybe the only exceptional skill can be only attached to their origin. Maybe, for instance, if you are from Ethiopia, so we mean you can start an Ethiopian restaurant. Now that will be an exceptional trade because maybe there is no Ethiopian food around and all those things. So, and maybe other skills that are homegrown that you will have come with them. So those are the things that I think are exceptional skills that the government is looking into. But still, even with those requirements, refugees could still apply and they were denied severally because the government of Kenya is trying to limit the number of refugees who can access the job and the labor market in Kenya. Yes.
And when you talk about the East Africa community, when you talk about the sharing of responsibility, so of course we know the Global Compact on Refugees came out in 2018. There is a conference happening this year to promote solidarity and cooperation for international cooperation on sustainable solutions and mechanisms to address refugee issues. What then are some of mechanisms or frameworks or durable roadmap you would think? You've been a refugee, you've studied law, you've interacted with refugees. What are some of these pragmatic solutions that we need not only to table but adapt and roll out and scale up, either at national level, at the East Africa community level, and also at the international scale?
Yeah, thank you so much, Warim. So I believe that the problem with the management of refugees is that people think refugees are people who are coming temporarily for 1 or 2 years. But you know, this one has already been seen to not to work because if looking at Kakuma refugee camp, there are people who came in 1992 and 1991, and those people are still there after today. That's basically like 30 years in one place. So there are people who have been in protracted situations and they have been there as refugees. And these people, that's where durable solutions, other alternative durable solutions come in. Because, you know, the Act, the refugee framework was modeled so that you are able to assist refugees for a short period of time, then you are able to return them back to their home countries. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. In such case, a protracted situation, there is need for the international cooperation and responsibility sharing, and this is where complementary pathways actually come in. For instance, you will have to talk about one, the local, the host community or the host country will have to look into national framework in which it can manage refugees effectively. But in the case for Kenya, for instance, because there's this huge number of refugees, then it has now to talk with UNHCR. UNHCR will partner with other states and see how they can assist refugees to maybe offer them durable solutions, for instance, whether it is through repatriation or whether it is through academic program like the WUS. Now WUS, World University Service of Canada, is a complementary pathway that that the government of Canada actually offers to refugees who have been through high school. So once you finish high school, they offer you scholarship to go and study in Canada, and with an opportunity after completion of your university to work and remain in Canada. So you see, this has worked for the last several years, like 10 years, for refugees in Kakuma and Dadaab. And I believe it is also working in the other parts of the world. So you see, now this one is also helping refugees become self-reliant, because if you are maybe like someone like me, if you finish from Kakuma refugee camp and then you go to Canada through the WOOS program, once you finish, you are able to assist your family. You can even resettle them back home. You can let them return home voluntarily, or you can even make them do business in Kenya. And those are the options that other countries need to explore. It should only be Canada. So imagine the work that Canada has done. So if another country like Germany and UK can do the same thing, and I think this is where responsibility sharing will really work effectively. In Kenya will do anything within its power to maybe integrate the refugees who are able to maybe contribute to the national development. For instance, those of us who are here. So we can now practice within the East African community. And this one is going to enhance what is called knowledge sharing within the community. So I'm a South Sudanese, I practice law in Kenya, and then I practice law in South Sudan. So this is going to, now, I will no longer be a refugee. I will be someone who is working both in Kenya and in South Sudan. And I think that is the objective of the East African Community Treaty, to make sure that, yes, the region, yes, that was the initial intention. So that now the skills that I have acquired here, one things are better back home, or even now I can always go back home, and the knowledge that I have learned from Kenya, I can go and apply it and help our people. So those are some of the things that people, that the UNHCR and other independent states should explore in helping refugees.
Thank you so much, Ajak. I hope to be in touch with you, and I hope to come to your official graduation.
Oh yes, oh yes.
You know, when you're a lawyer. And
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Multifaceted reasons: conflict, violence, fear of persecution, human rights violation, hunger are forcing people to flee. Finding legal safety in an unfamiliar land with unfamiliar culture, food, weather, language has become, as I said earlier, a necessity. And as humanity and as humans, and what is required to us to fulfill our humanity, accommodating these vulnerable groups should be a joint responsibility, one where compassion drives our decision. Well, everyone, that's it for the show today. I actually do owe you an episode on entrepreneurship on Africa. So guys, thanks for that reminder and those side chats. This show will be coming up next month. Please keep your comments and questions coming. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you in November for another exciting, informative, life-changing show here on Safari Podcast with me, your host, Wairimo Gitau. Kwaheri kwa sasa, au revoir, tuonane baadaye, see you soon.